Thank you. I'm going to put this here because I tend to go on, so I want to see what time it is. Okay. I get very enthusiastic, so sometimes it can be hard to shut me up. So go like this if I don't look at it. This is very impromptu. I was just actually asked to do this about 4 minutes ago, so you're going to really get top of the head information. I am the founder of the American Autoimmune Related Diseases Association. We are 20 years old. I'm a lupus patient. I had served, was one of the founding members of the Lupus Foundation of America, and in that capacity, I ended up serving as their national president. But from that perspective, I began to see that there were so many autoimmune diseases out there, and there was not really recognition that this was a disease category at all. Each one was looked at separately. We know there are over 100 autoimmune diseases and growing, as I'm hearing. And in my own family, there were many. I come from a very large family, so you have to take that into consideration, but we had about 4 or 5 autoimmune diseases just among my siblings. So I felt that there had to be a connection between these diseases. We could not just be that unlucky. And so that was actually the reason that I founded the organization, because as I looked into that and talked to researchers, I found that each disease was kind of siloed out there. That was true even at NIH. It was true among the organizations. They really did not communicate with each other. You know, the rheumatoid arthritis, the Arthritis Foundation really didn't communicate with the Lupus Foundation, and Behçet's didn't communicate with the Arthritis Foundation, and so on and so forth. And when I looked at NIH, I also found the same thing. There was a lot of redundant research, but often that research was from one disease to the other, but it was they were looking at the same thing, but they really didn't talk to each other. So I founded the organization for that purpose, and in our mission, collaboration is actually the bold word. So we set out with an idea of bringing about collaboration in research, education, awareness, and patient services. So from that, that led us to form the National Coalition of Autoimmune Patient Groups. 31 groups belong to that coalition right now. And what that coalition does, and that's a project of artists, so we actually support it, fund it, organize it. It's not a legal entity. We actually haven't went through that because it's worked very effectively the way that we have been doing it. So 31 groups belong to that, and that group mainly does advocacy. So through the effort of the National Coalition of Autoimmune Patient Groups, we've been able to put on congressional briefings. We've had legislation introduced and passed that called NIH for NIH to form a committee that goes across all the institutes around for coordinating autoimmune research, which really cut down on some of the overlap in funding for autoimmune diseases where they were funding the same thing. So that committee still meets on a regular basis, and then Congress put $50 million at that time. It's not a funded mandate at this time, but at that time they put $50 million into that committee, and that committee then funded 10 grants, one of which went on to prove that autoimmune diseases were run in families, had very similar genetic background, and a common disease pathway, and that justified them being called a disease category like we would look at cancer. And I always say in lay terms, cancer, actually all cancer has the factor of a mutant cell that's allowed to proliferate by the immune system. That's the common pathway or the common factor. In autoimmune disease, the immune system attacks yourself, creates inflammation or destroys the tissue, and that's the common factor. It's your immune system attacking yourself. So with that study, though, we found that 17 autoimmune diseases actually shared a similar genetic loci. which proved that they had more than just that they were connected. So that led us as a coalition to go to Congress and ask for a national research program for autoimmune diseases, and we were able to get that passed. Each one of us alone would never have been able to do that. At the time, I think 3 autoimmune diseases were receiving 90-some% of the research dollars for autoimmune disease. And NIH felt that there was probably about 300,000 people with autoimmune diseases. Through this research plan, they found that there were 24.5 million autoimmune patients. And in fact, that figure only included 26 for which there were good epidemiology studies. So it really helped NIH and government to see the magnitude of the problem, which when you look at each disease individually, most of them would be considered rare diseases. So it was definitely collaboration that put autoimmune disease on the map. No question about it. So we often do awareness campaigns with the other groups. We even our funding, we use the word collaboration as a mechanism for resource development, because we found that one of the things we didn't want to do if we had the collaboration of all these groups was to step on their fundraising toes, because they wouldn't have collaborated with us. That's just a factor. So we had to find other ways to raise resources. We did that through in-kind contributions, getting our rent donated, getting our accounting services donated, our public relations donated, our law firm in Washington donated. And you know what? We have found that to be the best sustaining resource, because if you work well with these companies and that do give you this in-kind service, they don't drop you. They keep doing it year after year, where major donors often find another place for their funding. So we have found that collaboration, even in resource development, has been very effective. I have a saying that in collaboration, 2 + 2 makes 6, and I firmly believe that. It is true that you have to have a common goal. You don't have to have the same goal. Each one of the single disease groups still do advocacy for their disease. They still do awareness for their disease. They still fundraise for their disease. They are a separate entity. They have not lost any of their identity. They have increased their identity, because the very first meeting, and really it was a matter of just, we called a meeting together, and we were the new kids on the block, so we didn't know if anybody would even show up for ARDA. That's our acronym. And they did. And we thought, well, what can we all agree on? And the first thing we agreed on is that we would all start calling our disease an autoimmune disease. So we started at that point. We could all agree on that. There was no disagreements. And as we all started using that in our outreach to the public and to Congress, that got the word about autoimmune out there. And I think the same thing would happen in pain, because you have many different pain syndromes, but you all have one common thread, that's pain. And that's a very understandable common goal, that you want to do something about pain. We have also found that even in the area of research, we have collaborated with other groups. The problem we identified is that basic research in autoimmunity was very low, and that was because there was no autoimmune group out there, and there's no autoimmunologists. So we actually have some of the same, I could definitely identify with some of the presentations here. We don't have a lead doctor that's an autoimmunologist. Autoimmune diseases are treated by all different specialists, and the same person may have to see 3 or 4 specialists. Coordinated care is a major problem. Early diagnosis is a major problem. 42% are told they're chronic complainers prior to being diagnosed with the 4 serious autoimmune diseases. So we had a lot of the same problems. So there was very little basic research. So we actually have collaborated with the single disease groups to fund some basic research. They put this much in, and our association will match it. And that has worked out well to increase the amount of basic research, because after all, It is the autoimmune process that is driving all 100 autoimmune diseases. And before I like to compare it to a train. We had all the cars on the train, but we did not know the engine. The engine that was driving all of these is where the research was definitely lacking. So again, there's my buzzer, so I'm going to be quiet. And I would just encourage you to look at how you can collaborate. What are the goals that you see? What is the largest, biggest, wishful goal that you have? And then work from there, because you will find that there are so many things that you can collaborate on, and that will enhance your work, and it will multiply your work. And somebody used a phrase here, I can't remember it right now, but I thought that was an excellent phrase for collaboration.